So who's your vice chair? Because Ross Brutch is not able to attend.
Is it me?
Adrian.
It's Adrian.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, it is me.
It's going to be a very silent meeting there for a minute.
Ross promised he wouldn't do this to me. All right, so what do? I give the date. This is the planning commission meeting for June 3rd, 2022.
June 13th. Yeah.
June 13th, 2022. I guess we just have 2 items on the agenda, right?
We should do a call to,
And
do a roll call, Adrian.
oh yeah, first of all, okay, we'll go through roll call. Who's here?
Just announce who's here.
Okay, so I'm Adrian Costello's here, and Dawn is here, and
Tony Bush.
Yes.
And Tony Bush is here. So that's 3 of us. We have a quorum.
It's good that Adrian knows everyone's name.
Yeah, I don't know my son's name.
Don't tell him that.
All right, so now that we have a quorum, we can move on with the meeting. We have 2 agenda items. One is approving the minutes from the last meeting, and the next is Andy's going to take us through these additions we need to make, or he's suggesting we make to make ourselves compliant to, what is that called again? The stormwater management, DEP.
It's the township has 2 stormwater management ordinances. Chapter 173 is the Delaware River South Watershed Act 167 Stormwater Management Ordinance. And we also have Chapter 174, which is in the Neshaminy Creek Watershed Act 167 Stormwater Management Ordinance. And those 2 ordinances cover the entire township. The Neshaminy Creek Watershed is in the northwestern section of the town. And that's basically Core Creek runs through the northwestern part of the town and drains into Newtown Township and or Middletown. And the remainder of the watershed flows into the Delaware River to the east and south.
Okay, so before we get into that, why don't we, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
I'll make a motion that we approve the May 9, 2022 minutes.
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor of approving those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, it's 3-0. So I guess the next one, and we have to vote on this at the end?
Actually, this is not a requirement that this ordinance be reviewed by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is required to review all ordinances that are related to zoning or subdivision and land development. This is a standalone ordinance. However, the Planning Commission most closely deals with the issues related to stormwater as it relates to development of property. So the township decided to forward this on to the Planning Commission to get your input on the ordinance prior to it being discussed and advertised by the Board of Supervisors.
So we're gonna discuss, this is for discussion to give you and Andy our comments, but we're not voting on saying yay or nay on this thing.
Well, you could vote that you recommend that
Okay.
they
All right.
proceed, or you can vote for any changes you feel might be necessary.
Okay, all right, got it. All right, just want to make sure I understood. All right, so I guess I'll turn it over to Andy at this point.
Yes, thank you. So the township has a permit with DEP. DEP has issued to the township a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit for the stormwater discharges that are conveyed from the township through the township's MS4 system. The MS4 stands for the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. That's generally all the inlets, pipes, stormwater management basins, systems that drain to waters of the Commonwealth or streams within the township. DEP issues that permit to the township to discharge runoff to the waters of the Commonwealth. In order to, and we have 2 ordinances As Jim had briefly discussed, Chapter 173 and Chapter 174, which handle discharges within the Neshaminy Creek watershed and the Delaware River watershed. Those two ordinances are virtually identical. There are some differences in the amount of runoff that can be discharged in each of the locations. But for discussion purposes tonight, DEP is making it a requirement of municipalities to be in compliance with their model ordinance of 2022 in order to maintain a NPDES permit for the township's MS4 system. And so we completed a comprehensive review of the model ordinance and compared that with the township's existing stormwater ordinances. And we found a few items that need to be updated in the township's ordinances. And those are included in your packet. Briefly, the first one is that the stormwater ordinances do not contain a section for waivers. This would be for developers or property owners who have or who can demonstrate a hardship that they can request a waiver for compliance with the township's stormwater management ordinance. And this would be a typical waiver could be something like they don't want to remove additional trees on their property in order to install a stormwater management system, or they have their property has the type of soil which if stormwater was infiltrated into the ground, it could cause either a pollutant concern or a concern for sinkholes being created. So the soils might not be conducive for infiltration of stormwater management. So that's what typical ordinances would be. DEP is requiring a section for the ordinance to include a provision for waivers, and the township currently does not have that. So the next item, and I'm just going through the two checklists that were provided in your packet there. So the next item would be Article 4F, which would be a submission of as-built plans and certificates of completion for any BMPs installed in compliance with the stormwater management ordinance. So this BMP stands for best management practice. So this would be either rain gardens or stormwater infiltration systems, meaning underground stone seepage beds or graded surface retention basins, things of that nature. Planted trees could count as a BMP. So what we currently do not have is a requirement for them to submit as-built for their BMP systems. We, in the past for large developments, we have required it. As we've required that from developers just so that we can sign off on it, or if they're getting an individual NPDES permit through DEP for the project, those are required. The as-built plans are required in those instances. But for smaller projects, if somebody is installing a building addition or a pool on their property and they're putting in a small stormwater BMP, an infiltration system on their property, that's where as-built plans and certificates of completion have not been required in the past, and they would be as part of this ordinance adjustment. The next would be Fees and expenses, the township ordinance, the model ordinance does require that review fees would be required for a site plan to include administrative costs, review costs, attendance at meetings and inspections. Currently, our ordinance does require fees from developers or property owners implementing stormwater management BMPs, which does include administrative costs, review costs, and inspections. It does not include attendance at meetings, and so that's a small language change that would be added to the ordinance. The other item would be a transmission of written reports concerning inspections to the municipality. Would be just inspection reports that get filed to the township. Currently, there is no requirement for that in the ordinance, and this would be a change to make that requirement. And I believe that is it.
Andy, I think you missed one. Before waivers, there was also an erroneous permit provision. Should that be included as well?
Yes. So any permit or authorization issued or approved based on false, misleading, or erroneous information provided by the applicant would be void without the necessity of any proceedings for revocation. So any work undertaken or use established pursuant to the permit or other authorization would be unlawful. So that would be language that would be included in the new ordinance as well. Thank you, Mark. So that summarizes the adjustments to the ordinance. And like I said, not including these items would run the risk of the township not obtaining their NPDES permit for the next cycle, which begins in 2023. We have to implement these adjustments by September of this year.
Andy, just two quick questions. Any reason why that you know of that the Planning Commission should not recommend these modifications? And or also, if you could tell us what would be the penalty for not obtaining the permit for the township? Or what would be the consequence, not the penalty, but what would be the consequence of not obtaining that permit?
You mean from DEP not obtaining a NPDES permit? There could be some significant consequences as far as not, basically you would have a stormwater management system that would not be allowed to discharge runoff into waters of the Commonwealth, or they would enact fines that could be a large amount. That would be fines per day for every day that stormwater discharges discharged to the waters of the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so then, I don't see any reason why the permit or the Planning Commission would hold a recommendation on that.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may, Adrian. The only thing as I was saying before the meeting started, Tony, I don't think you were here yet. Most of the EAC saw that this was going to be on the Planning Commission's agenda, and as you probably are aware, given your history, they worked on the low impact design ordinance. They've worked on riparian zone ordinances and other items that are discussed within this model ordinance that includes riparian zones, low impact design, and some other items. So they've asked that they be given the opportunity to review and comment on the ordinance, to provide input prior to the planning commission and the board of supervisors voting on it and recommending approval. I flipped through it because first time I've seen it as well. I think there's a couple opportunities. I think generally the EAC would be in favor of everything that's in here. There's a couple opportunities to make it even that much better based on what some of our current ordinances, where I think the EAC could provide, and this is very nuanced, specific details in there that I think they would probably have comment on just based on some very initial looks. So so I'm on their behalf because they did reach out to me. They're asking that they said they could get comments back within the next few weeks because of their meeting schedule, and then provide those comments back to the township and the planning commission to be part of your discussion if that so moves y'all. I know I won't vote on anything at the board level until I get the EAC's feedback on it. So.
And just to be clear, I think I heard Andy, you say that this has to be approved by September 20 something or other.
14th.
September of this year. Yeah.
So there's
Okay.
time.
So there's time.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know about Dawn or Adrian, how you feel, but I think it makes sense to hear what the EAC has to say, and we've got time to vote on this and make a recommendation for the board of supervisors, in time for them to act as well.
Yeah, and I think that if the EAC has language, it comes down to language in an ordinance. And so if the EAC has language that they would prefer over the language that DEP uses, I would caution that, when you change words that could or could not fundamentally change the meaning of things, then you run the risk of DEP not accepting those changes. But yeah,
I'll give you one example of something that I saw.
To get what DEP is getting at, and
Tony, one really simple example I think is that in the DEP language, I think it allows for Andy, correct me if I misspeak here, please, that may allow for as riparian zone that may be only 35-foot offset from the top of bank, whereas we have a couple different riparian zones, but 35 feet is smaller, is less positive, let's say, or less protective than what our ordinance has. I think 50 might be our least wide option currently. So it's just, that's the type, and there's only a couple things like that, I think, but it would be good to get their impact, because I don't think they would do anything less. Obviously, I'd highly doubt that they do anything less than the DEP. They might bump a few things up to match what we already have, or just be in line with things, or give a few ideas.
So I'd like to ask Andy a question. I was under the impression that our stormwater management ordinance was acceptable, but needs to include those additional provisions that you just summarized in order to comply with the model ordinance.
correct.
I was not under the impression that there were being any other substantive changes, such as riparian buffers versus as is set in our ordinance versus the model ordinance.
That's news to me as well. I don't think
That was my impression when I looked at the agenda and I was reading through this. We were just specifically only discussing the changes that Andy's recommending we make to make us compliant in these two processes. And so I would agree that if there are substantive changes we want to make to our ordinance beyond that, then there's probably more discussion. But for the purposes that were at least laid out to us when we came up with the agenda, especially I'm sensitive to the fact that it is summertime coming up, and conceivably before September, a decision needs to be made. The board of supervisors may only meet twice. We may only meet twice. I would, in the spirit of what at least I interpreted the original agenda item to be, I would go ahead and vote whether to approve or recommend anything knowing that the EAC does still have an opportunity to get in front of the Board of Supervisors. And if they have an issue that the Board of Supervisors agrees with, that beyond the scope of what we're talking about, then it should be sent back to us and everything, and to go back through the process like we would any normal, substantive change beyond what we defined tonight.
And
Am
I was
am
only,
missing anything?
Yeah, no, I apologize if I didn't make that clear, that, for the most part, our ordinance is in compliance with the DEP ordinance as it's written. And then the only changes would be what I had reviewed with the planning commission tonight.
So like, we're not talking about taking anything away. All we're doing is talking about the handful of items that currently our codes don't have. We're talking about just adding those to make our code compliant. That's it.
Right, we're not adopting DEP's model ordinance.
No.
We are we are adding language to our stormwater management ordinance that brings us in closer compliance with some of the sections of DEP's model ordinance.
So I just want to understand what it is that the EAC wants to change then, just generally speaking. Dan, you gave the one example, but is it things that are not in the model ordinance that we already have, and that, or what is it?
So, and that's the issue. Really, the issue is they haven't seen it yet. They did a quick cursory review of the model ordinance versus what they have now, and they don't have any background. So normally when we would do a stormwater or environmental related ordinance, it would go to the EAC first versus going to the planning commission first. And then, so the EAC, because the EAC is a little more technical in nature usually, given who their membership is, and they would provide some technical comments, if anything. And again, I don't think these are huge items, so I don't want to put any spin on it that way. But normally, when it's a technical ordinance like this, it would go in front of the EAC. Again, it's process stuff that we've talked about before. Go in front of the EAC first, let the EAC chime in. They probably have a couple of comments that spin around. They'd make their recommendation. You all, the planning commission, would have your opportunity to make your own comments after hearing them, and then it would get, I doubt there would be much back and forth, because I don't think there needs to be, in my personal opinion, based on the limited stuff that I've seen. And then it would get kicked up to the Board of Supervisors for a vote before September. And I know we're not skipping meetings this year. We got a lot of meetings scheduled.
so may I make a suggestion at this point?
Barbara, before we go on, I got two comments. One, Jim, were we scheduled to meet in July?
Yes, we're scheduled to meet the second Monday in July, July 11th.
Do you anticipate agenda items at that time?
There may be the plan for 1566 LLC, maybe.
Okay. Just, and then switching back to Dan's last comment about process. I've talked about this in other business on some prior meetings. And I've actually also talked to two other supervisors offline, not our liaison, about process and what's happened over the last year or so. And I think there needs to be better channels of communication between the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission and other commissions like or committees like the EAC. And this is a prime example of where the EAC's input, even if it's nominal, should be solicited. I think we've got time for that to happen. And if we're meeting in early July, this still gets to the supervisors over the summer and plenty of time for them to do whatever they need to do in September. I personally am in favor of pushing this off, even if it's just for one meeting. And even if we were to have the exact same outcome, it just gives it gives more opportunity for more people to have input. and gives the EAC the respect that they should be getting in this particular instance. I'm not going to belabor this, but I'll bring up one fairly recent example of another situation that I thought input from a citizen advisory board should have been sought and wasn't sought. And that is the Play for All planning report that was recently approved by the Board of Supervisors. It's basically a master plan for Park and Rec. Under the state statutes, there's one commission in this town that has advisory input. That's the Planning Commission. No input was sought from the Planning Commission. That plan there was some stakeholders gave input, but the plan was approved, and it really should have been before the Planning Commission at some point for our input. It's really subsumed within master planning, which is what the Planning Commission is charged with. And that didn't happen. I know of a lot of stakeholders that were not contacted or whose input wasn't sought. And I'll give one example and then I'll get off my soapbox. The library, which is right across the street, parking lot from the township building on township property. They do a ton of community programming for young kids, for old people. This Play for All planning report had a section in it about expanding the community center and doing more community programming. And there was absolutely no effort to investigate any possibility of any collaboration with that which is already taking place right across the parking lot. And it's all about communication. The township's done a bad job lately about communicating with volunteer advisory boards about input, and it can change. But if you have advisory boards, you should be using them. And that's just my 2 cents. And I'm sorry for being on a soapbox. It just seems like it's a reoccurring situation. So I'm all in favor of letting the EAC have their input and letting us deal with this in July.
So if I may, following Mr. Bush's comment, I was going to recommend that if the Planning Commission at this preliminary stage is saying they have no opposition to the inclusion of those specific sections in our stormwater ordinance for both chapters 173 and chapters 174, that when the memo is drafted outlining the results of this meeting, a copy of that memo is given to the EAC with the specific provisions that were discussed attached. Because I think the EAC is under a misconception that there's a review of trying to bring our ordinance into similarity more akin with the model ordinance than what we are originally planning to do. And that might be the best approach to ensure that there's no miscommunication as to what is being proposed by revising our ordinance.
And Barb, yeah, sorry, if I misspoke, I was trying not to. I don't think there's a misconception. I just think they were not part of the process, so they don't really know what's there because they haven't had an opportunity to review to date. That's all. I don't think there's any misconception. They're just caught by surprise that they didn't get a chance to review this. That's all they're asking for.
I'm kind of in the mindset of what I think Barb just suggested, because I agree we should communicate. I don't think we were asked to do anything that would change, loosen, tighten anything really in what we have in our code. It's just all we're essentially doing is voting on Andy's suggestions to get our current code to meet the DEP requirements while still maintaining the substance of our code. Because we're not changing anything substantively. We're just adding some administrative things and making sure there's check marks with some language, not taking away anything what we already have. Is that a fair assessment? Yes?
I think so.
You're muted, Andy. But yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. It's
so
basically all administrative
So
issues.
I'm inclined to take this under a very, like, that narrow perspective. Like, we have a set of, requirements, and all we're doing is adding some language to making sure it complies with the state's requirements, but we still essentially have the same, we're not loosening anything up. We have the same standards we've always had.
Well, the only thing that I would say is we're not loosening anything, but we are
That's what I
tightening.
mean.
We are
that's-
tightening.
Yeah.
You know, requiring an as-built plan for a pool permit or for when a homeowner installs a stormwater management underground seepage bed to comply with the ordinance for pool, for the additional impervious area created for pool decking. That could be a cost to the homeowners that they did not have to take on before. And so now this would be an additional cost to them. But
Andy, does this, you mentioned pool decking, that is a question. Does this at all change the definition of impervious? Like, I know for some reason, we don't include the area of an actual pool as impervious, even though it has a curved number of 100 in our ordinance. Does this get us in line with what typical stormwater management rules would talk about? Or are we still?
All this would require is an as-built plan.
That's
for the stormwater management system. And
for everyone.
making sure that the stormwater, you know, as it's constructed, the stormwater management system is sized for the impervious area that was installed.
But that's required for the DEP purposes, correct?
That would be required as part of the new township stormwater management ordinance. It is already required for large developments that have an individual NPDES permit through DEP. So any large development that has a disturbance of more than 1 acre needs an NPDES permit individually from DEP, and so that would be a requirement of them.
Does it define exactly what an as-built plan is? What it needs to be included? Because that, as you know, as-built plans can get pretty detailed. Or do you need a surveyor to go out and take elevations and all that stuff of every little?
It does say that the as-built submission shall include a certification of completion signed by a qualified professional verifying all permanent stormwater management BMPs have been constructed according to the approved plans and specifications. The latitude and longitude coordinates for all permanent stormwater management BMPs shall be submitted at the central location of the BMPs. If any licensed qualified professionals contributed to the construction plans, then a licensed qualified professional must sign the completion certificate.
And I guess, let me ask a question on that, Andy. If I understand this whole discussion correctly, that whole requirement that may be new and some may consider more onerous than it has been in the past, that's essentially the state of Pennsylvania is telling us we have to do it that way.
Correct.
So it's like, so again, I go back to it, even if we are getting a discussion about the onerous nature of that, is there a scenario where we say we're going to ignore what the DEP is telling us to do and not require that?
I don't think that would be wise.
Yeah. So again, I go back to, okay, we're adding things, potentially adding things. We're not taking anything away from what we've already decided to put in. And we're just adding we're just agreeing to add a couple of things that get us state compliant. Unless we have a specific comment or issue on one of those things, which I can't in this scenario imagine, I don't know if we need to wait. I think the language of making sure we copy the EAC so, you know, they have a chance to see this and weigh in before the Board of Supervisors votes on this and over the summer is probably a prudent thing to do and a constructive thing to do. I don't know what the EAC is going to tell us that we would decide to do differently, because this is pretty binary decision-making.
I see your point, and I kind of agree with you. I was going to sort of suggest something here. I mean, Andy, you told us that essentially if we didn't do this, the township would not obtain its permit and would have potentially significant financial ramifications. So these changes need to be adopted because there's no reason not to adopt them. And why wait? At the same time, it sounds like there may be some issues of potential additional changes to the ordinance unrelated to these specific changes. It puts the two ordinances in compliance with the model ordinances. The barber's suggestion sounds good, and maybe they do have other changes which they come back. The EAC has other changes which they come back to either us or the supervisors with before September, so that they can be included in whatever it is that the supervisors do. I would think maybe if we recommend that the supervisors adopt these changes, but not vote on them until they've given the EAC the opportunity to comment if there's anything else that should be changed in them as well.
I'm fine with that.
And I'm saying that because, look, we had something 2 meetings ago or 3 meetings ago, whatever it was, when we were all asked to give an advisory opinion on something that the Board of Supervisors had already voted to advertise. So our opinion obviously meant squat, or it meant nothing. I apologize about that. So it meant nothing, and I think we need to give the EAC the opportunity to comment, not necessarily on these changes, but on any additional changes that they think would be appropriate.
I totally agree. Like, I'm not arguing with the spirit of what you're doing at all. Just in practicality, and I paid attention enough to these meetings over the summertime. Things don't move that fast over the summer here because a lot of people are away and doing things. We don't meet as often, and that's fine. I'm just trying to be sensitive to that, and all I'm trying to communicate is I don't see a reason for us to table it for another discussion and wait for that but I'm perfectly happy and comfortable with giving some language in our motion to suggest that the EAC take a look at it and make sure that all of their input has been incorporated before the supervisors make a final decision. I'm perfectly happy with that.
I think it's a good compromise.
You see what appreciates that too. I think they would tell you that right off. So thank you for thinking of them.
It would be approved subject to EAC review and comment.
Yeah.
And so they do have other meetings scheduled between now and the rest of the summer, because the issue becomes, what if they don't get it done by, review by September?
I'd be shocked if the EAC doesn't meet before then, given who's on that board.
Okay.
Having been a member and knowing them.
I can't remember if it was Barb or if it was Tony that said, I think, putting the verbiage like, we approve the changes laid out by Andy to make us compliant. I say, but we recommend before the Board of Supervisors votes on it to get input from the EAC. Now, we're punting it a little bit to the Board of Supervisors, but you guys own everything anyway, right? We're all at the mercy of you guys. And, hopefully that's paid attention to. We copy it to the EAC so they see this. And if they want to have a voice, it's in their best interest not to take a long time. And, I think that says, given what we thought the agenda was about today, we approve of it. However, we recognize that there's another step in this process. There might be more expertise. They may want to weigh in on the ordinance in general. And, we recommend you at least hear what they have to say if they have anything to change. And then at that point, if they are suggesting changing something else in the ordinance, that would have to go back through the machine anyway, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the process covers that. We just need to make sure we communicate in a way it's clear to everyone what we're kind of asking. And maybe hopefully in the future, probably in the future, maybe the EAC does see something like this before we do. But reality doesn't always follow theory. So
yeah. Well, and Adrian, to your point, we have a Board of Supervisors meeting this Wednesday. Seems like we're meeting every week these days for something. This is a normal meeting, not another special meeting to allocate money to something. But so during my supervisor report, I can make a statement, might report back on this meeting and say, you recommended approval of these changes, because technically you're not approving, you're recommending approval is how we do things at Planning Commission. That being the one caveat being that the recommendations that we send it back to the EAC to review and get their opinion as well. Because it sends a message to the township administration that they really should be including the EAC from the get-go. That doesn't happen all the time, as we've seen with ordinances that are very specifically EAC driven. It hasn't happened recently. So I think it just sends a message that that's proper protocol, as Tony was mentioning before.
I'm fine with that.
So, Mr. Costello, if it pleases this commission, an appropriate motion might be to recommend approval of the suggested revisions as presented by the township engineer, pending review and comment by the EAC before the Board of Supervisors' final review and consideration.
Yeah, the only thing I'm gonna go back, I think I'm okay with that. The only thing I don't like is if for some reason, I'm just thinking the opposite, like if the EAC can't meet or whatever, like I'm part of my, I'd like to, that's why I'd like to say is, we
Timely.
approve it. What was that?
Timely, just say timely review by the EAC.
I didn't. Yeah, timely, okay, that's fine.
Timely review.
No.
Just,
Yeah.
So
they're
the corrected motion would be recommend approval of the revisions as suggested or presented by the township engineer, subject to the timely review and comments by the EAC before final review and consideration by the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah.
Why don't you just insert the date that it has to be done by?
September
I don't-
15th, 2022.
When's their next meeting?
Well, I don't think we can dictate to that. And obviously, if it comes to the part where it's becoming too close to the September, the Board of Supervisors can still review.
We can ignore everyone and just
Yeah.
vote.
That's
if we
true.
felt
That
like
is
it.
true.
Yeah.
So,
Which I don't want to say we've, because I don't usually go that route myself, but I'll say the board has.
it has been done in the past.
Yes,
Yeah.
multiple times.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm okay with some of the timely review. I think everyone look, we're not, we're not splitting the atom here. Timely review, I think everyone understands that. And I think everyone understands the timeline of being compliant by mid-September on this is important for the township. Right? Maybe the only other thing is add verbiage in there, timely review to ensure that the township stays in compliance.
Or by the DEP deadline might be another way to say it.
Yeah.
But I mean, we might be getting too deep into the weeds, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, to Dan's point, just adding that at the very end of that motion for, approval by the Board of Supervisors prior to the DEP deadline.
Okay.
That's good.
Everyone, all right, someone want to make that motion?
I'll make.
pro
the
tip, I usually just say so moved.
So
I'll make
moved.
the motion. That's
Okay.
what Barbara said.
Second. All right. Any other comments, public comment? Doesn't sound like it. Okay. I don't hear anything. All right, so everyone who supports the motion, say aye.
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 All right, 3-0. I think that's it, right?
Yeah, and I just want to, as I said before, we may have in front of us at the July meeting, the plans for the 1566 LLC subdivision. That's the one at the intersection of Route 332 Newtown Yardley Road and Creamery Road, where the primary access to 4 new lots will be through the end of Buck Creek Drive.
Is this one we did the tour of?
Yeah, that's the one we did the
Okay.
site tour of.
Yeah.
So they did their reviews, they revised the plans, they resubmitted it. It's been sent out to all of the commissions and all of our consultants for review. I think Andy has his review back already, which I can forward on to the planning
I'm
commission.
looking forward to seeing it.
And depending on what those reviews say and what their response is to them, they may be coming in front of the planning commission. They will also need a variance, I believe, because they are proposing to provide sewer to the 2 existing homes that are going to be torn down and rebuilt by going underneath the small creek that goes in the property. So a variance would be needed for that minor disturbance. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, before that happens, we'll give everyone plenty of notice. And it will be advertised in the newspaper, minimum of 10 days in advance of the meeting in accordance with our ordinance. Also, just to let you know, we may have another plan coming in very soon. There's a property on Big Oak Road that had sold recently. And I've been in discussions with their engineer where they're asking questions about all the submittal requirements. So we may be seeing another subdivision coming in shortly. And when that comes in, I will send it out to everyone and post it on our planning commission website for the general public.
Okay.
Just Adrian, a little plug for the hard meeting tomorrow, since you all were, or I think all of you were involved in the in some level the Prickett Preserve development. Tomorrow night at Harb, they're going to be looking at the renderings for the barn restaurant and a few other items there. So it'll give you an update on something that I think everyone here has been at least interested in on some level. Nothing for you to vote on or anything. It's more of just a public meeting, so you can keep track on something that may be of interest. That's all.
All right. Okay. Does anyone have anything else? All right. Someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. We're done.
Have a good night.